I'd like to take some time to take you on a brief orientation tour involving the description of our curriculum and also the strategy for blending our CLIL and our CEFR programs together. We can describe our project that way. It's sort of a hybrid blend of two academic programs. So we're coordinating a CLIL approach to ELT across math, science, and language arts subjects, doing that together with this CEFR kind of pure language education program. So you have two polar ends of a spectrum here, CEFR and CLIL. And on the CLIL side runs Edmentum's core academic content from kindergarten through 6th grade. And that's in the Education City program, really a premier program in the world of digital education. Now on the CEFR side, we're currently focused on phonics, followed by A1 starters, A1 movers, A2 flyers, B1 and B2 levels. That's 6 levels in all. And aligning these with the CEFR recommendation, then each level is calibrated for about 200 hours of in-class instruction. The program will eventually extend all the way from preschool through 12th grade. In order to make the two programs work together, there were some key strategies that we've employed. We'd like to list them briefly here and then maybe give an overview of the reasoning behind this approach that we've landed on here. First of all, both the CLIL and the CEFR, they run as independent learning paths. So on one side is an independent CEFR course. On the other side, an independent academic course in, of course, Education City. Number two, we've created an online support environment for the CLIL. So you can think of these two, like I use the term the polar, right? I mean, the academics and the CEFR are very different. So we need a bridge between them. And half of the bridge is an online support environment for the CLIL, or for the academics. Number three, we've created an online support environment for the CEFR, right? That's the other half of the bridge between them. So connectivity between the academics and the CEFR, it occurs in this this online lesson abstraction, this double online lesson abstraction. That's the center where they meet. Now, reasoning behind this general approach, it kind of grew out of an energetic and sincere effort, maybe. Well, maybe it grew out of a failed effort to blend the programs more closely. You see, at the early ages, all pressure seemed to build up on the CEFR side, and it would sometimes force the CEFR out of alignment with the strategic needs at the early age. Now, at later ages, the students, they have sufficient language skills. CEFR principles are not compromised when you mosh the programs more closely, but we found especially that the trying to align them more closely would detract from the student needs on the language acquisition side for one thing. But then on the other side, we found that the low proficiency students needed more support for the academics. And so it was just a very sensible solution to move to the bridge abstraction, those online lessons to give extra support. So we created the MindPocket layers, right? The MindPocket abstraction lessons where the student experience kind of moves gradually and it moves supportively over from the CEFR over to the graded and age-appropriate Common Core lesson in Education City. That experience, first of all, the student, they complete the CEFR book lessons, preferably in a classroom setting. Each lesson consists of about 5 or 6 pages. It depends on the CEFR level. So number two, after they complete the book work, the student then moves on to the online CEFR lesson inside MindPocket. So they go from the book to the online lesson. They're married, they're matched. Here, the learner and the teacher both are supported by games and PDF pages and puzzles and other classroom learning tools. So they can learn independently, or they can learn in a classroom setting with these online tools, these lessons. Number three, after they complete the MindPocket CEFR support lesson, the student then moves to the online Common Core language support unit. This is also a MindPocket abstraction unit, the second half of the bridge, if we use that analogy. So here we are using the CEFR language that is appropriate at the student's level, and we're using that in an intervention lesson for the Common Core. So we basically, it's academic pre-lesson which exposes the students to the education lesson vocabulary, the education lesson learning goals. It exposes them, but it uses the language level that they can accommodate. And we try, especially again at the early ages, to keep that language very localized to the CEFR lesson. Later we can reach back to previous CEFR lessons for the language or broaden the language tools we use, but at the very early ages, we want that academic intervention lesson to stay very local to the language that they learned in the attached CEFR lesson. So the fourth step, of course, finally, the student is ready to move to the online education city, the pure academic environment, where they have the tools now and the orientation to complete the work for that accredited lesson. So really, the students can start on a pure L1 academic program at kindergarten level because of the supports and the way we've approached it. I'd like to just give you a real brief tour through these steps online here. We'll just look at the books, and then we'll look at one of the CEFR lessons that are attached to the book lesson. Then we go to the Common Core language support that is attached to the online CEFR lesson, finally to the online education city lesson, which is a unit which is attached to the online language support lesson. So 4 steps. Let's just go through that really briefly, and I'll show you the environments. So let's just start with a brief look at the books. This is in PDF format. We make them available in PDF form online, but also, of course, they're available in printed book form. Each book is 60 to 75 pages, depending on which CEFR level. This level has about 5 pages per lesson. Then you get into lesson 2. So after you're done with the book lesson, you go directly into the online CEFR support lesson. Here's Runway, books 1 through 3. Let's take a look at Runway 4. This is the CEFR support lesson that's directly aligned with Unit 4 in the book. As I mentioned, there's the PDF version of just that lesson, obviously not the whole book, just the 5 pages for that lesson. We have some questions over to the side, drag and drop, matching, multiple choice, and fill in the blanks, different question types, just to give the students some cognitive experience with the content. We can actually toggle this view to expanded or minimized view, so the questions move to the bottom and the assets become pretty much full screen in the expanded view. You can toggle back and forth. We also put some extra support units in here for teachers to use. And then here's the link over now to the CLIL support lesson. So up here you can see that this is from kindergarten science. It's lesson 7 on the academic Common Core trajectory. It looks like it's about carnivores and herbivores. You have the link going back to the CEFR again. So this is the bridge we talked about between the CEFR and the CLIL. So here we are back in the academic support lesson, same questions. Directly from here we go into Education City's academic lesson. This is the accredited Common Core lesson. So it's just, as we mentioned previously, 4 steps. You start with the books, CEFR books, go directly to the online CEFR support lesson, and from there to the associated CLIL language support lesson. Finally, you get into the actual Education City unit itself. And that's an overview of the student experience and just the learning environment online. Now we just returning to a little bit of a description here on the basis of alignment, how we've made decisions, right? In order to select appropriate units for matching the CEFR over to the CLIL, we've run both courses through a process, right? In the CLIL process, the first criteria of selection simply involves the age and grade appropriateness of the academic lesson, right, as it aligns with the CEFR trajectory. So in order to understand what that means, let's look at this document here. So this document shows how the 18-month CEFR levels, how they match to the public school grades for a model student. Right, so if a student came in at, let's say, preschool and they stayed with the program entirely the whole way, this document shows how the programs map to each other. An example can be seen here in the kindergarten level. So we have the Education City academic units listed in Common Core alignment of order, right? This is the order that they may best be delivered pedagogically in the academic trajectory. But from a CEFR perspective, the language expectations are often too high in some of these lessons. So we have to displace these lessons over on the CEFR side Okay, and we do this according to just a low, a middle, and high level categorization, which maps to the CEFR this way, right? So low language expectation, CLIL, it maps to books 1 through 6 in the CEFR level, the corresponding 18-month CEFR level. Low maps to books 1 through 6. Mid language expectation on CLIL, that maps to books 7 through 12 in CEFR. And then high language expectation, CLIL, like if there's units that have high language expectations, we have to push those forward to books 13 through 18 in the CEFR level. So while we are staying grade and age appropriate, we're displacing some of the academic units out of their Common Core trajectory to match them with the CEFR in this way. Okay, so in these polarized pure lessons, they stay aligned. I mean, the academic lessons stay aligned, but as they attach to the CEFR, they get displaced through the abstraction connectivity in MindPocket. All right, I hope that makes sense. Okay, now the second criteria of selection involves coding each CLIL lesson. We code it. And we code each CEFR lesson. Well, we code them with relevant linguistic markers. Okay, so let's go through some of these. We're using sort of a 5-matrix factor analysis in the early ages, like in the kindergarten level. For example, we look at the context. Number one, the context. Context is just the education city unit. It usually has a unique context. So we've listed these most common contexts and we code for it, right, as a factor in our selection. Okay, secondly, we look at function. So we've identified a list of 11 functions, like for example, personal information, greetings, wants, needs or preferences, habits or hobbies, describing objects, describing acts, functions. And we code both the CLIL and the CEFR with the most closely relevant functions. Sometimes they don't match on one factor, so that's why we are coding for all 5 factors. Number 3, the CEFR defines specific topics like body or animals or clothes or people or food, numbers. So we also code both the CLIL and the CEFR on this metric. Then we do also usage structures. What we mean by that is largely grammatical approach early on. So in the CLIL intervention lessons, we have to identify both sentence types along with question types, right? And we code both lessons on this basis. The reason for that is, again, we need to simplify the language in the lesson and match the simplified language between the CEFR and the simplified Common Core lesson, so that we're teaching the students, at an English level language that they can accommodate. All right, so as an extra note on this coding system, it accomplishes a few goals for us, 3 main goals, I guess, and maybe more, but I'll just touch on 3 in development. Number 1, the coding, it helps us to analyze and manipulate and possibly even to impose sometimes patterns in the overall program. You can actually, by matching these up, you see certain patterns. See what you've covered and what you haven't covered, right? And what you need to cover. Coding also helps teams to collaborate fluently on the same relatively sophisticated conceptual framework. I mean, we're actually trying to incorporate a lot in here, and this makes it possible for semi-specialists to work on it together. Number 3, coding helps us to identify and modify the paradigms of approach we use when we address the changing learner needs as the program progresses. A good example of that is going to be the topics will change as we go from CEFR level to CEFR level, or the grammar focus, the usage patterns will change from simple sentence structures to more advanced focus. And so we can control that using these coding systems. Just to wrap up here, putting it all together, these selection methods, after we make them and after we have all these linguistic markers in place, it becomes an easier task to align the units. But connectivity does not always just jump out at you. It doesn't always just inherently exist between the CLIL and the CEFR, even with all of this analysis. So it's the actual lesson creation, the online lesson creation, where decisions have to be made that more closely align the units in that bridge area, that abstraction area. So this tightening of correlation, it happens in various ways, but the coding and the analysis framework helps us to make cogent decisions in that final process of creating the lessons. Sometimes the real work of making a sensible student experience flow when they go between these 2 polarized courses, that success happens in how the online lessons are finally constructed. So that pretty much wraps up our overview of the strategy and structure of our curriculum.